Imagine stepping into the bustling streets of 17th-century Amsterdam. Canals shimmer in the sunlight, merchants haggle over exotic spices and precious goods, and the city hums with wealth, art, and innovation. Painters like Rembrandt and Vermeer capture the brilliance of a society at its peak, and Europe watches in awe as the Dutch Republic rises to global prominence. It is a time historians call the Dutch Golden Age, a period of unprecedented prosperity and cultural achievement. But beneath the glittering surface lies a story rarely told, a shadow that shaped the very foundations of this wealth. Much of the prosperity celebrated in paintings, architecture, and literature came at an unimaginable human cost. Hundreds of thousands of African people were forcibly taken from their homes, transported across the ocean, and enslaved to fuel the Dutch economy. Their labor built plantations, transported goods, and enriched Dutch merchants and elites alike. Yet their suffering has long been hidden, overlooked, or minimized in historical narratives. This is not just a story of numbers or trade, it is a story of real human lives, families torn apart, and cultures disrupted. It is a history that challenges the sparkling image of the Dutch Golden Age and forces us to confront uncomfortable truths about wealth, power, and human exploitation. In this video, we will uncover the hidden realities of Dutch slavery, explore the lives and resistance of enslaved Africans, and reveal how this past continues to echo in the present. From brutal slave codes to acts of rebellion and modern acknowledgements, we will explore the full story behind the prosperity of one of Europe's most celebrated eras. If you want to understand the real story behind the Dutch Golden Age and hear the voices that history tried to silence, make sure to like this video, subscribe to our channel, and hit the notification bell so you won't miss any part of this eye-opening journey into history. As the Dutch Golden Age reached its peak, the opulent wealth and vibrant cultural life that filled the streets of Amsterdam, Delft, and Rotterdam owed much to a dark and often overlooked foundation: the transatlantic and Asian slave trades orchestrated by the Dutch East India Company, and known as the VOC, and the Dutch West India Company, or WIC. These powerful trading corporations were far more than mere commercial enterprises. They were engines of a global system designed to extract maximum profit from human labor. Enslaved Africans were treated as commodities, their lives meticulously calculated into the balance sheets of distant boardrooms, where officials in polished offices discussed shipments, cargo, and returns as though they were speaking of barrels of sugar or crates of spices, rather than people torn from their homes. The legal and social framework that allowed such cruelty to flourish was codified in what came to be known as the Dutch slave codes. These codes, in their rigid and merciless enforcement, represented some of the harshest regulations governing enslaved people in the early modern world. They went far beyond the systems established by neighboring European powers, mandating extreme punishments for any acts of resistance, however minor, and creating a climate of constant terror across plantations and trading posts. Slaves faced punishments so severe that they often lingered on the border between life and death, a calculated spectacle designed to maintain absolute control and deter rebellion. There were provisions for whippings, the breaking of limbs, and even burning, punishments that left permanent scars on communities and generations, serving as a grim reminder of the relentless power wielded by the Dutch colonizers. This environment of calculated violence did not emerge in isolation. It was intimately tied to the economic imperatives of the time. The VOC and WIC were not merely interested in controlling territories or trading goods. Their primary goal was maximizing profit, and enslaved labor was the most efficient means to achieve it. Sugar plantations in Suriname, tobacco fields in the Caribbean, and laborers transported across the Indian Ocean were all part of a meticulously organized system that demanded obedience and punished defiance without hesitation. Mortality, while tragic, was accepted as part of the business model, and the dehumanizing practices codified in the slave codes ensured that fear, rather than negotiation or empathy, maintained order. Yet, even in the midst of this orchestrated cruelty, the humanity of those enslaved shone through acts of resistance and survival. Enslaved Africans maintained cultural practices, languages, communalities, subtly defying the dehumanization imposed upon them. Despite the constant threat of violence, they found ways to preserve their identity, passing knowledge, skills, and stories across generations, and occasionally staging rebellions that shook Dutch plantations and trading posts to their foundations. The rebellions, though often brutally suppressed, were living testimonies to resilience and courage in the face of overwhelming oppression, revealing that even in the most controlled and violent systems, human agency could not be entirely extinguished. Through the meticulous records of the Vok and Wik, historians today can reconstruct not only the scale of the trade, but also the strategies of control and violence employed to maintain it. These documents provide insight into the calculated and systematic nature of Dutch slavery, demonstrating that what might once have been portrayed as a series of unfortunate circumstances was, in fact, a deliberately structured system of exploitation. By examining these records alongside personal accounts and oral histories preserved through African diasporic communities, a fuller picture emerges. The Dutch role in slavery was neither incidental nor benign, and the wealth and cultural achievements of the Golden Age were inseparable from the suffering endured by hundreds of thousands of Africans across continents. This story of the Vok and Wik's involvement is not only a chronicle of brutality and profit, it is also a story of resilience, survival, and the complex human consequences of a system designed to commodify lives. It challenges the notion of the Dutch Golden Age as a purely celebratory period, forcing a reckoning with a history that intertwines innovation and beauty with oppression and unimaginable human suffering, revealing a legacy that continues to influence both historical scholarship and contemporary conversations about justice and remembrance. Amid the rigid hierarchies and unrelenting cruelty of Dutch plantations, a spark of defiance began to flicker in the hearts of the enslaved, a quiet but resolute refusal to accept lives dictated entirely by fear and forced labor. By the mid-18th century, the plantations along the Berbice River in what is now Guyana had become emblematic of the Dutch Empire's capacity for exploitation, with enslaved Africans toiling under the scorching sun, enduring disease, starvation, and unimaginable punishments imposed by the harsh codes of the Dutch West India Company. It was within this landscape of suffering that the story of Koffie, a remarkable leader, began to take shape, illustrating the extraordinary resilience and agency of those subjected to bondage. Koffie emerged not merely as a figure of rebellion, but as a visionary who understood the possibility of creating a new social order within the confines of oppression. The revolt he led in 1763 did not erupt spontaneously. It was born from years of frustration, suffering, and careful observation of the vulnerabilities of the colonial system. Enslaved Africans on the Berbice plantations had long maintained networks of communication and mutual support, sharing news, strategies, and even cultural knowledge that enabled them to organize and resist with intelligence and foresight. Koffie, rising to prominence within this context, became the unifying figure capable of translating individual acts of defiance into a coordinated and strategic uprising. On a Sunday morning, when Dutch planters and overseers were gathered in churches along the river, Koffie and his followers seized the opportunity to strike. Moving swiftly and decisively, what began as targeted attacks on plantation overseers quickly grew into an organized effort to establish a separate governance structure along the Berbice River, where the now free enslaved could live autonomously while negotiating the possibility of trade relations with the Dutch. Koffie's vision went beyond mere retaliation. He imagined a dual system where both parties could coexist, a radical plan that challenged the conventional order imposed by centuries of slavery. This ambition underscored a sophisticated understanding of power, diplomacy, and the social and economic dynamics that had long exploited African labor. The Dutch response was brutal and uncompromising. Coffee's efforts were met with overwhelming military force. And after more than a year of tense negotiations and intermittent conflict, internal divisions and the relentless pressure of Dutch retaliation led Koffie, in accordance with West African traditions, to take his own life. Yet his death did not signify the end of resistance. It became a symbol, immortalized in the collective memory of the African diaspora and in monuments erected centuries later, honoring both the courage and the strategic brilliance that Koffie embodied. The Berbice Rebellion revealed that enslaved Africans were far from passive victims. They were active agents capable of challenging a system designed to strip them of identity, dignity, and hope. Beyond the immediate events, the rebellion left a profound impact on the structure and psyche of Dutch colonial holdings. The meticulous records left behind by colonial authorities, which included detailed interrogations of surviving rebels, provide a rare window into the lived experiences, motivations, and voices of enslaved Africans, voices that had been systematically silenced in broader historical accounts. Through these narratives, we see the interplay of fear and resilience, oppression and ingenuity, illustrating that even under extreme duress, enslaved people exercised moral and strategic judgment, challenging the oppressive systems around them. Koffie's leadership and the Berbice Rebellion remind us that history is not solely written by those in power. It is also shaped by the courage, resistance, and aspirations of those who are marginalized. The uprising stands as a testament to the unbroken spirit of enslaved Africans and their relentless pursuit of autonomy, dignity, and justice. It deepens our understanding of Dutch slavery, showing that beneath the wealth, culture, and apparent sophistication of the Golden Age, there existed an enduring struggle for freedom, a narrative of resilience that echoes across centuries and continues to inform contemporary reflections on justice, memory, and historical accountability. By the mid-17th century, the Dutch Republic had firmly positioned itself as a global trading powerhouse. And at the heart of this expansion was a carefully orchestrated system known as the triangular trade, a network that intertwined Europe, Africa, and the Americas in a cycle of commerce fueled by human suffering. Ships laden with goods, textiles, firearms, metalware, and other European commodities set sail from bustling ports like Amsterdam and Rotterdam, carrying products designed to entice local African traders. On the African coast, these goods were exchanged for men, women, and children who had been captured or sold by local intermediaries, a tragic and complex process that intertwined European ambition with local power dynamics. Once aboard the Dutch vessels, the enslaved endured the harrowing Middle Passage, a grueling transatlantic journey marked by overcrowding, disease, and the constant threat of death, their lives reduced to cargo numbers. Yet their humanity and resilience quietly persisted even under these extreme conditions. Arrival in the Americas marked the next phase of this commerce, where enslaved Africans were forced into the brutal labor systems that underpinned the production of high-value commodities such as sugar, coffee, and tobacco. Plantation fields stretched endlessly under the tropical sun, and every crop harvested, every processing mill turned, contributed not only to local economies but also to a vast European market hungry for these exotic goods. Dutch merchants meticulously tracked shipments, profits, and mortality rates, turning human lives into entries on balance sheets, while the goods produced by enslaved labor returned to European ports, enriching investors, families, and state coffers alike. This system created a feedback loop in which the economic success of the Dutch Golden Age was directly tied to the exploitation of enslaved people, their labor transforming the flow of global commerce and solidifying the Netherlands' place as a formidable maritime and trading power. Yet the triangular trade was more than a business model. It was a phenomenon that reshaped societies across continents. African communities faced disruption and depopulation, with cultural, social, and familial networks fractured by the constant removal of members to distant lands. In the Americas, the arrival of enslaved Africans gave rise to complex Creole societies and the blending of traditions, languages, and beliefs, producing enduring cultural legacies even amid oppression. The human cost of this global commerce was immense, but it also created a network of shared experiences and resistance, as enslaved individuals maintained cultural practices, nurtured familial ties where possible, and in subtle ways undermined the systems that sought to erase their identities. Historians examining the Dutch participation in the triangular trade find extensive documentation. Shipping logs, company records, and correspondence reveal not only the scale of the operation, but also the calculated methods employed to sustain profit while managing what was essentially a human cargo system. From the moment goods departed European ports to the transshipment of enslaved Africans across the Atlantic and their labor in the Americas, the Dutch approach reflected an unprecedented level of organization and global strategy, blending commercial acumen with a chilling efficiency that prioritized wealth over life. The triangular trade also served to embed the Netherlands in a wider network of global interconnections, linking European markets, African societies, and American plantations in a single, though morally fraught, system. Dutch ships and merchants became intermediaries in a vast human and economic network, their profits funding not only private fortunes but public projects. Urban development, and the cultural flourishing that characterized the Golden Age. Yet beneath this veneer of sophistication and prosperity lay the untold stories of suffering, resistance, and survival, revealing that the Dutch role in global commerce was inseparable from the experiences of those whose labor had been coerced, whose lives had been disrupted, and whose legacy, though often suppressed, continues to resonate through history. Through this lens, the triangular trade is not merely a tale of economic expansion. It is a story of human endurance, the interdependence of societies across oceans, and the moral complexities underlying the wealth and power of a nation. It reminds us that global commerce, while celebrated for its innovation and reach, was built on a foundation of exploitation. And understanding this reality is essential to fully grasping both the achievements and the hidden costs of the Dutch Golden Age. The human cost of Dutch slavery extended far beyond the ships that carried enslaved Africans across the Atlantic, reaching deep into the heart of African communities and reshaping the lives of countless families for generations. Entire regions along the West African coast experienced waves of disruption as individuals, often young and able-bodied, were captured or sold into bondage, leaving behind fractured communities and empty villages. Traditional social structures were torn apart, and the fabric of daily life rituals, kinship ties, and local governance was violently altered. Families were separated, sometimes permanently. As children, parents, and siblings were sold to different traders and shipped to faraway colonies, leaving behind a lingering sense of loss and dislocation that could never fully be repaired. Disease and malnutrition accompanied this upheaval, both during the violent process of capture and in the cramped, unsanitary conditions aboard ships, claiming countless lives before even reaching the Americas. Yet even under the relentless pressure of dehumanization, enslaved Africans fought to preserve their identities, cultural practices, and knowledge. Music, storytelling, spiritual rituals, and languages traveled with them across the ocean, quietly defying the system designed to erase their heritage. On plantations and in colonial towns, these cultural expressions became acts of resistance, offering enslaved people a sense of continuity and belonging despite the brutality surrounding them. Over time, the blending of different African cultures and the adaptation to new environments gave rise to distinct Creole societies, preserving fragments of memory and tradition that would inform generations to come. One of the most striking manifestations of resistance and self-determination was the creation of maroon communities. Settlements of escaped enslaved people who fled plantations to establish independent societies in remote and often inaccessible areas. These communities not only provided sanctuary but became centers of resilience, self-governance, and cultural preservation. In places like Suriname and the Caribbean, maroon societies maintained African traditions while innovating new social structures suited to their circumstances, embodying a profound form of defiance against the Dutch colonial system. Their very existence challenged the notion that enslaved people were passive victims, demonstrating that even in the most oppressive environments, human agency, ingenuity, and courage could survive and thrive. The Dutch economic success, so celebrated in Europe, was thus inseparable from the profound suffering inflicted upon African communities. Yet the records of this human cost were often minimized or ignored. While ships' logs and company ledgers documented cargo, profits, and mortality rates, they rarely conveyed the emotional and social devastation experienced by those torn from their homelands. Historians today rely on a combination of these administrative records, oral histories, and cultural traces preserved in the diaspora to reconstruct the true impact of slavery, revealing the extensive, long-lasting consequences that extended far beyond the plantations themselves. These effects were not limited to the immediate victims but reverberated across African societies, altering demographic patterns, weakening traditional leadership structures, and fostering cycles of social and economic instability. Yet, within this devastation, the resilience of enslaved people and their descendants created a legacy of cultural richness, resistance, and adaptation that endured despite centuries of systemic oppression. The preservation of identity, the creation of maroon settlements, and the survival of language, music, and ritual illustrate a remarkable human capacity to endure, resist, and transform even the most oppressive circumstances into a foundation for community, memory, and cultural continuity. Understanding this impact is crucial to comprehending the full scope of Dutch slavery. It reveals that the prosperity of the Dutch Golden Age was built not only on the labor of enslaved people, but also on the profound disruption of African societies, a legacy that continues to influence cultural and social realities to this day. The story of these communities is one of resilience and determination, highlighting that even in the face of systematic oppression, human spirit and cultural identity cannot be extinguished. As the centuries passed and the Dutch Golden Age receded into history, the brutal realities of slavery that had underpinned the nation's wealth were often ignored or sanitized in public discourse, leaving generations unaware of the human suffering that had facilitated so much prosperity. Yet, in recent decades, a slow but meaningful reckoning has begun. As scholars, activists, and descendants of enslaved people have pushed for acknowledgement, understanding, and restitution, this modern engagement with the past challenges the long-standing narrative that celebrated Dutch innovation and trade while conveniently overlooking the role of human exploitation, creating a more complete, if uncomfortable, picture of national history. Institutions across the Netherlands have started to confront this legacy, opening archives, funding research, and facilitating public discussions that lay bare the extent of Dutch involvement in the transatlantic slave trade and the operations of the VOC and WIC. The meticulous records of ship voyages, trade ledgers, and company correspondence have allowed historians to trace not only the scale of slavery, but also the mechanisms of profit and control, illustrating that wealth accumulated by the Dutch elite, including the House of Orange, was directly tied to human suffering. Such revelations have reframed the Dutch Golden Age as a period of both cultural brilliance and profound moral compromise, prompting difficult questions about responsibility, commemoration, and historical memory. A particularly significant moment in this ongoing reckoning came in 2013, when the Council of Churches issued a formal apology on the 150th anniversary of the abolition of slavery in the Netherlands, marking the first organized acknowledgement of the nation's culpability. A decade later, in 2023, King Willem-Alexander extended a personal and institutional apology, recognizing not only the Netherlands' role in the slave trade, but also the financial benefits that accrued to his own family. Through investments in colonial enterprises, the King's statement highlighted the staggering human cost of Dutch slavery, noting the hundreds of thousands of Africans forcibly transported across the Atlantic, many of whom did not survive the journey. Alongside the apology, the monarchy commissioned independent research into the House of Orange's involvement, signaling a commitment to transparency and historical accountability, with findings expected to provide a clearer understanding of the intertwined legacies of profit, power, and human suffering. Government initiatives have also accompanied these formal apologies, aiming to educate the public and foster awareness of the enduring effects of slavery. Funds have been established to support historical research, commemorate the experiences of enslaved people, and promote engagement with communities affected by this legacy, both within the Netherlands and in former colonial territories. Educational curricula have begun to integrate these narratives, ensuring that students learn about the human cost behind the nation's historical wealth. While museums, exhibitions, and monuments provide tangible reminders of this history, by acknowledging the systematic exploitation of African people and the wealth it generated, Dutch society is taking steps to confront the past with honesty, creating spaces for dialogue, reflection, and healing. This modern reckoning also extends beyond official statements and institutional initiatives. It reflects a broader cultural and moral shift, as Dutch citizens, scholars, and activists grapple with the implications of slavery for contemporary society. Conversations about restitution, memorialization, and reparative justice are becoming increasingly prominent, emphasizing that historical acknowledgement alone is insufficient without practical measures to address inequality and raise awareness. The process is ongoing and complex, encompassing questions of economic justice, cultural memory, and ethical responsibility, but it demonstrates a willingness to confront uncomfortable truths rather than allowing them to remain buried. Through apologies, research, education, and public dialogue, the Netherlands is gradually reconciling its celebrated past with its darker chapters, illustrating the importance of historical accountability in shaping national identity. This acknowledgement does not erase the suffering endured by generations of enslaved Africans, nor does it erase the injustices woven into centuries of trade and colonial expansion, but it creates a foundation for understanding, remembrance, and, potentially, restorative action. By facing this history with honesty and integrity, Dutch society not only honors the resilience of those who endured slavery, but also provides future generations with a more truthful and nuanced view of the Golden Age, one that embraces both achievement and accountability as inseparable parts of the nation's story. As we reflect on the Dutch Golden Age, it becomes clear that the glittering achievements of art, commerce, and intellectual advancement were inseparable from a darker reality, one built on the suffering and exploitation of enslaved Africans. The wealth that allowed cities like Amsterdam to flourish, the masterpieces that continue to inspire, and the international influence of the Dutch Republic were all deeply intertwined with systems of oppression that uprooted countless lives and reshaped entire communities. Recognizing this history is not about diminishing cultural achievements, but about embracing a full and honest understanding of the past, acknowledging both triumph and tragedy as essential threads in the fabric of history. The legacy of Dutch slavery extends far beyond the archives and ledgers of trading companies. It is etched into the demographic, social, and cultural landscapes of the Americas, the Caribbean, and Africa. Influencing identities, traditions, and community structures for generations. Families were torn apart, cultures were disrupted, and entire communities were forced to adapt to unimaginable hardships. Yet the resilience of enslaved Africans and their descendants shines through the preservation of language, music, rituals, and oral traditions. They maintained their humanity, built new communities, and resisted the dehumanizing forces that sought to erase them. Maroon societies, for example, stand as enduring testaments to courage, self-determination, and the refusal to accept oppression quietly. Modern acknowledgement of this painful chapter is crucial not only for historical accuracy but also for education and justice. Apologies from Dutch institutions and King Willem-Alexander, alongside initiatives to fund research, commemorate victims, and integrate these narratives into educational curricula, represent important steps toward accountability. These efforts encourage a deeper understanding of how the past continues to shape the present and underscore the importance of confronting uncomfortable truths rather than allowing them to fade from collective memory. By grappling with this history, society can honor the resilience of those who suffered and ensure that future generations recognize the full spectrum of human experience behind the wealth and culture often celebrated in isolation. The lessons of this history extend beyond the Netherlands. They remind us that prosperity built on exploitation carries consequences that ripple across time and geography. They highlight the moral responsibility of individuals, communities, and nations to acknowledge wrongdoing, seek justice where possible, and cultivate awareness that prevents history from repeating itself. Remembering the lives of those who were enslaved and understanding the systems that enabled such suffering is a vital act of empathy, respect, and humanity, offering insight into how societies can navigate the complex intersection of achievement and ethics. As we conclude this story, let us carry forward the recognition that history is never one-dimensional. The Dutch Golden Age was a period of brilliance, but its brilliance was shadowed by profound injustice. By embracing this duality, we honor both the cultural achievements and the lives of those who endured unimaginable hardship, acknowledging their resilience and courage as central to the human story. Thank you for watching. And if you found this journey through history enlightening, do not forget to like this video, subscribe to our channel, and share it so more people can learn about the hidden truths of the past and the lessons they offer for our present and future.